A brand new Hello Neighbor game is about to come out, excitingly enough. As we know, Hello Neighbor's long-awaited sequel is currently in its alpha stage, and on April 7th, it will be entering beta, where I can only assume we'll get a full game following. Similarly to the other main Neighbor game, as the game has progressed, it has taken on many new forms, and the current one we have looks more promising than ever. However, that's not to say it looks perfect. Obviously, until we have the game, we won't know if any of the concerns I'm going to mention in this video are true, and once the game comes out, I'll make sure to talk about all of its issues and positives in a future video. But taking this game from a speculative note, there are certainly tons of redeeming qualities about it. However, I've noticed there's also a lot of similar themes and patterns that have occurred across other Hello Neighbor games, more specifically the first one, that are seemingly reoccurring and could be a waving red flag for this game. Make sure to join my Discord, by the way, link in the description, or even check out my Fiverr where I can make personalized thumbnails for your own video. So the first thing I want to go over is basically where most of the hype is around. Obviously, I assume that you know Hello Neighbor was a game that first got popular a few years back. It was simple, fun, and incredibly original. However, as I've said multiple times along with hundreds of other separate videos about the topic, this game, when it came to the final release, failed to perform up to people's expectations. The lore was disappointing, the game was buggy, and the AI was dreadful. It also didn't help that as Hello Neighbor began to lose popularity, they had somewhat became a meme after the Twitter team shamelessly started basically begging Game Theory to make videos on them again. So at this point, the reputation for the title had been mostly entirely tarnished. Sure, Hello Neighbor has and always will have tons of dedicated fans that will play everything that comes out. However, throughout the past few years, Hello Neighbor has been striving to get some of the mainstream success it once had years previously. They've tried spin-offs, heavily inspired mini-games, and all sorts of other different ways of trying to regain the Hello Neighbor hype quite unsuccessfully. But for once, it seems to have worked, as around a year ago, the Hello Neighbor team had actually dropped a brand new game after an already successful title in Hello Guest called Hello Neighbor 2 Alpha 1. This alpha was incredibly back to the basics, bringing the player back to an original Hello Neighbor home. However, this time it was in a more abandoned state, and the one we were trying to save is the neighbor himself. It was a super cool concept that, once again, I would say was pretty successful. Nowhere near to the point of the first game, but it totally outshined all the other attempts in my opinion. Anyway, with this game being released back in 2020, we are here in 2022 with actually no game updates ever since. But as I was hoping for and somewhat suspecting, this was for a good reason, as despite it being quite a while, we have gotten tons of information on Hello Neighbor 2 with trailers and such, and as we see in these teases, there's once again a brand new huge map change for the game. And we can see there's a lot of different things coming to the sequel, like a full-blown open world, multiple different neighbors, and of course the old antagonist of the first alpha called The Guest. The game looks pretty promising, everything seems to be nice and well done, and I, along with pretty much everyone else, has so much hope for this beta, especially since it's already going to be dropping on consoles, and it seems to be at a nearly finished state as is. But there are quite a bit of things that I'm worried about with this game, and pretty much all of them root back to what I believe caused the first game to plummet just as fast as it came up, and that factor is called overambition, or basically just trying to do more than what the creators can actually handle. I'm sure it's a concept that you've heard about with games like Security Breach, where trying to do so much with a game overall makes it unstable and messy. The most prevalent instance of this happening with Hello Neighbor would by far be with the amount of bugs. Hello Neighbor 1 was absolutely horrendous with glitches, and it was borderline unplayable at times. Oftentimes, things wouldn't spawn in, the neighbor got stuck, things just wouldn't work, and overall, all these glitches just kind of outshadowed the game itself. Even worse is that this was a theme that carried over into Hello Neighbor Hide and Seek, Hello Guest, and even the first alpha of Hello Neighbor 2 itself. The issue has easily been the biggest one to show for Hello Neighbor, and despite things like the story being at least initially super well, from day one, that game has had game-breaking bugs absolutely everywhere. And it was easily brushed off back when the game was just in pre-alpha, but when nothing about these games ever got better, even in their full versions, it just started to scratch heads and make people think if the developers even put any care into their game. Now, obviously, I don't really agree with that argument. I do feel like they put a lot of care into this game. I mean, they literally built different houses for the prototype build, pre-alpha, alpha 1, alpha 2, alpha 3, and then they literally redefined all the alpha houses multiple times to fit into a final game. But the problem with that is, with so much content being created, this just meant that it all ended up being overall disappointing. But moving from the first game onto the sequel, how would this actually reflect onto the second version? Well, it's pretty simple. Once again, we see Hello Neighbor entirely redeveloping their game multiple times, from Hello Guest prototype to Hello Guest to Hello Neighbor 2 Alpha 1, and now we are once again changing the entirety of the game and narrative. Not to mention that this beta looks absolutely massive compared to the mentioned versions, and it has a lot more features as well. So my fear is that over ambition will once again repeat with Hello Neighbor 2, and the game will end up being unpolished and be an absolute nightmare to play when it comes to bugs, which absolutely cannot happen in a world where the only way this game has a chance of getting popular again is by getting all the popular YouTubers who made the game popular at first to come back to the franchise, and those mentioned big YouTubers at this point just humor the game for how badly built they are. This is probably the biggest red flag for me because it just feels too good to be true for this game to actually come out built. And while there is a pretty fair point that can be made to argue this, that of which being the fact that this beta has taken way longer than any other version, which is very true, I still don't think that sells this game to me yet as a redemption title, because who cares how long they spend on the game when every other title up to this point has been buggy as hell? If they didn't focus on the quality control on the games before, I just don't see how it's something I can say will be any different now. But of course I am hoping to be proven wrong in those aspects. Another very significant thing that I think scares me for this game is the whole AI thing. AI, or artificial intelligence, or basically the neighbor himself, has always been something TinyBuild has prided themselves on. For example, the first game had its own little breakdown on YouTube showing off how well the AI worked, and they really made it look a lot better than it actually was. Because let's be real, in every single instance of Hello Neighbor, the AI has been pretty dumb. Now tying into the new Hello Neighbor 2 beta, once again the team had made a new breakdown on how well the AI is going to work, and while this is by far the most promising one, it also seems to be the most complex, which based on a certain theme that we have throughout the entire franchise just seems to be more of a reason for this AI to be a major failure. I honestly feel like this AI thing is what I've seen talked about and hyped up the most. And yeah, if you look at the AI updates, things do seem somewhat promising, but the thing is that would only be if it actually worked properly, and as noted throughout this entire video, most things holding TinyBuild back from getting the success they once had back then has been because things pretty much never have worked properly. To sort of look on a more positive note, I want to talk about how this game can actually solve these problems, and how despite these issues, there still is a lot of hope for the game in comparison to the other games anyway. So in terms of solving the issues, I think that the Hello Neighbor team needs to just simply put, do less and work more. They have been absolutely incredible at coming up with ideas, and honestly, if I could design the perfect Hello Neighbor sequel myself, I couldn't do any better than what TinyBuild is drawing up here, at least conceptually. But luckily enough, as mentioned earlier in the video, for being honest, while I definitely can't go as far to say Hello Neighbor has taken a step back with this game, they have definitely taken their time. The term Hello Neighbor 2 was officially used by TinyBuild back in late 2019 to early 2020 in the Hello Guest prototype, and we are just now getting it as a beta. So clearly for once they're actually taking their time with this game, which is a plus. And while I do still think it's a valid concern that they've changed paths multiple times in those few years, over half of that time has been purely spent on this beta alone. So if you guys are awaiting this title, I honestly actually think this is by far the best chance we have at getting the perfect Hello Neighbor game. It's just that while I think that the potential for this game is the highest ever, if the game doesn't fix its persistent issues throughout the past years, this game could instead go on to be one of their greatest failures. But hey, in less than 2 weeks we will see. Check out this trailer analysis if you want some more news on Hello Neighbor 2, subscribe, and peace.